Hi, I'm Tiger, and welcome to my continuing tutorial series on creating a custom user interface that can be used in Warhammer 2. It's been a few weeks since I've published an episode in this series, as I was concentrating on releasing updates on my own mods. But with that taken care of, we can get back into the swing of things. So in today's video, it's going to be a short one. We will add some code for saving and loading custom data, which in our case will be the amount of our custom resource that the player has accumulated, which we have up here, tutorial resource amount. So the saving and loading of custom data is quite straightforward, and there are many examples that can be seen in Creative Assembly's own scripts. So let's start with the save function. That's called when the engine reaches save trigger. Now these save triggers can include when the game autosaves, when the player manually saves the game, and when the game shifts between the campaign map and the battles map. Now, we'll create a new section at the bottom of our script for our persistence functions. So, since we're going to be saving the resource amount, let's just copy that. Let's go to the bottom of our script, like so. Let's just create a few extra lines. Alright, so we want a persistence section, like so. Okay, and just to separate it a bit. Alright, so the saving function. So this is an event handler based on the campaign manager object, which is exposed by Creative Assembly. So there's a function called add saving game callback, and then we just open the brackets, go down a few lines, close our brackets. Now inside here you actually declare your function, which will be handling the callback. So we pass in context and we say end. Okay, so that's the framework for our save. So how do you actually save a value? So there is a method on the campaign manager which we can use. So cm campaign manager, and then we go save named value. So that method will save what we give it to a certain spot in the save file, and we give it a specific key, so then we can retrieve that at a later time. So the first thing you need to give it is the key. So in our case, we're going to give it the name of our variable, like so. So straightforward. The second thing you need to give it is the actual value. Well, the value is coming from our variable, tutorial resource amount. The third thing you need to give it is the context, which is given to us by the function wrapper. So our line ends up being cm saved name value. Pardon me, not saved. Why did I put a D on the end? cm save named value, and then the key, which is the name of our variable, and then the value, which will be coming from our variable, and then the context. And that's it. That will then, when the game hits a save point, that will put our resource amount into the save file for retrieval at a later date. And that's all there is to it. So saving is very straightforward. So let's have a look at the opposite end, which is the loading. So the load will be called when the player obviously loads a campaign from the main menu, and when the game shifts between the battle map to the campaign map. So let's have a look at what we have for the loading. So much like the saving, it's an event handler based on the campaign manager. So this time it's add loading game callback, and then we'll do the open brackets and the close brackets, and like so. Let's just do a bit more room between them. Okay, and then pretty much the same. We have inside the function, which will actually be doing the execution of the load. Oops, need to press the right key. So function and then end. And then, much like we had the cm save named value, there's another method which is the complete opposite, which is cm load named value. Now in this case, we want to load the value into our variable. So the first thing we have is our variable is equal to, then we say cm, oops, not that one, cm load named and then value, and then this takes three arguments. The first argument is the key that we want to load the value from. So we use the same key that we used when saving. The second argument is the default value. So if it cannot find the value with the key that we specify, this is what will be returned. So we'll just leave that as 0 for now. The third argument is again the context. Okay, so that's going to take the value that's in the registry with the key mTutorial resource amount, and it's then going to load that into our variable mTutorial resource amount. So we've got our tutorial resource amount updated, but when we've loaded back in, we do need to tweak a few things in our interface. So what one of the first things we need to do is calculate what tier we're actually on, and then we need to update the user interface to that tier. So to do that, we'll just have a few extra little parts. So let's just put a comment about what we're doing here. So calculate the tier from the persisted data, from the persisted, and then we'll say that data. So to do that, we currently have in our script, if you recall, where is it? Here it is. So we currently have calculate progress bar tier. So we're going to call that, and that will return the tier. Now we don't need to pass it anything because it's reading the mTutorial resource amount. So, excuse me. So we're going to go local tier is equal to, and then we're going to call that method to calculate progress bar tier, passing in nothing. So that will give us the tier that we are currently on based on the data we've just loaded. So we then want to say, well, is this tier that we've just calculated greater than the module level tier value that we've been tracking? So has the tier increased, basically? Because if it hasn't, there's not much point in updating the user interface. So is this tier that we've just calculated, based on the information that we've loaded, higher than the tier that we already have as our value? If it is, then we come in and we want to update our user interface. Oh, excuse me, just knocked my microphone. So we want to update our user interface, and the first thing we do is to call update tutorial UI. Update tutorial UI, and we don't, and we pass in the tier that we've just calculated. So our progress bar now will pick the correct image based on that tier. And then the last thing we do in here is we update the module level value for the tier. So m progress bar tier is equal to the tier we've just loaded. Oops, there we go. All right, so we've got our load function here, and we're handling the callback. So mTutorial resource amount is equal to load named value, giving it the key, and if it can't find it, we'll take a 0. Then once we've got that value, we're going to calculate what the tier is based on that value. If the tier is greater than what we know the current tier to be, then we'll update our user interface and we'll update our tier. And that's it. That's all there is to the loading of that information. So now when we go into our game, play a couple of turns and see how our tier has increased, if we save and leave and go back in, then when we load up that saved file, then the tier will load and the user interface will show the correct value. So it's pretty straightforward. As I said, there's a lot of examples of this in CA scripts. So that's pretty much all that I do with my loading and saving functions in my mods. If you look at my scripts, you might find that down the bottom there's usually a few sections where I'm loading up other variables. But that's just to do with the actual mechanic of those screens, not so much the actual loading and saving. So as I said, this was going to be a short one today, and we now have the ability to store and retrieve custom data, which is of course an important aspect of our mechanic, because if we don't have that, then our progress bar is just going to reset itself to 0 when we load a save game. So in the next episode, we'll probably be looking at some work in the pack file in the database section, as we add some effects for our different tiers to trigger. Until then, I'd like to thank you for watching and encourage you to let me know if you have any questions, or just give me some feedback. Is the series proving useful, and so on. So I'm going to try and attach a link to the source code this time. That was a request that somebody made a couple of weeks back, and I'm also going to try and add a link to the images that were created in the very first tutorial. So if you want to play around with those, you can. So as always, I'd like to give a quick shout out to my patrons for their continued support. Thank you to Hot Apple Pie, Cody Bonds, Alexander, and Solarith Magnetar, who is my latest patron. I'm Gretaga. Thank you very much for watching. Hope this has been useful, and I'll see you in the next video.